Hello and welcome to the Futures Lab. So, we have our cards being created, and when we click on them, it shows us one of the types of cards we've made. The problem is, if we keep clicking on the same card, it always flips to a new random type of card face. So whatever symbols you're using, for me it's these fruit, it keeps changing. What we need is a way of keeping track of all of these cards so that when I flip one over like this one, we need a way of making sure that the computer remembers that it's always an apple and it's not meant to be something else like bananas or a watermelon. So to do this, we're going to need to make a list and we're going to use some variables as well. So go back to your code and to do some things to our card sprite. Make sure that you've got your card sprite selected. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a variable, and that variable is going to keep track of how many cards we have. So what we need to do is look on the left side of your screen and all the different colors, categories. Click on the orange one, the dark orange one called variables, and then in the top left corner, click on make a variable. This variable is going to be called card counter. Press OK. And then what we need to do, what you'll notice is that in your game, you now have this card counter variable here. Now, a variable is like a magical box that contains a single piece of information. In this case, it's a number, and the number is going to go up when we make our cards. So we need to make sure that we start the count at 0 every time we start a new game. So what you need to do is you need to go look on the left side of your screen for set card counter to 0. Drag that out, and we want that to go underneath when green flag clicked. Okay? So the next thing that we need to do is we need to look for define create cards, and then look down until you find create clone of myself. So drag from the left side, change card counter by 1, and put that just above create clone of myself. Let's test the game. When we hit go, you'll see that every time a new card is made, it counts that card. So we have each time we're making 28 cards. And if you're making more or less cards, then the variable will adjust itself accordingly. So this variable is just one number that changes. And a list is basically just a bunch of variables. So what we're going to do is we've got our card counter variable. That's going to keep track of how many cards we have. The other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that each of these cards has its own ID number, so it knows which card it's meant to be. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to create what's called a local variable. So this card counter variable is called a global variable. This one it's the same box with the same number in it, and there's only one box and one number. And that number is 28 currently. What we need is we need each of these cards to have its own box with its own number, so that each of the cards has its own, it knows what number it is. This card in the top left knows that it's card number 1. This second card here knows it's card number 2, all the way through to card number 28 in the bottom right. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to make another variable. Click in the top left corner, make a variable, but this time, make sure you've clicked for this sprite only. Now we're going to call this variable card ID. Now you might have heard the term ID before. It stands for identification, and this is going to be a good way of keeping track of having a different number for each of our cards, so all of our cards know which number card they are. So we need to look for when I start as clone, and we need to get out a set variable to 0. So yours will say set card counter to 0, but click on that white triangle and change the variable to set card ID. And then what we're going to do is look in the top left corner for card counter, drag that out and put it over the 0 in set card ID. So it's going to say set card ID to card counter. So this might seem confusing, but basically the card counter keeps track of how many cards we have. And this piece of code here, when I start as clone, basically makes sure that each of these individual cards has its own number that is unique to it. This is going to be important later for our code. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a list, and this list is going to keep track of all of our individual cards. So we're going to go to the red category on the left, My Blocks, and we're going to click in the top left corner, Make a Block, and we're going to call this Create List. Okay. Drag your define create list off somewhere by itself. We're going to put some code underneath this, and in the top left corner drag out create list, and we need it to go look for when green flag clicked and look all the way down until you've got create cards, and drag out create list and put that underneath create cards. So this here, this little create cards my block links to this big define create cards block, and we know that everything in here creates the cards. The same thing's going to happen with our create list. Everything that's underneath define create list, that's going to put all of the information into our list. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to create our list. So go to variables, the orange category on the left, and then click on make a list. We're going to call this card list and press OK. Card list, and you'll notice that now on the left side of your screen you've got all these really dark orange new lines of code that you can use, all to do with this new list you've made. And you'll notice in your game you've got this list right here, and we've used lists before, but if you haven't used them before, imagine like a shopping list. You put items in the shopping list, and the list can be long or it can be short, and each of the items has its own line, and each of those items can be changed. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for define create list. We're going to put some code in here. So first of all, we're going to make all of these cards, and then we need to make sure that we generate pairs of cards, because remember, the aim of the game is to find pairs, is to find matching. So you find an apple and another apple, and if they're both apples, the cards disappear and you keep playing the game. Now if you have 5 apples, you'll pair 2 of them, you'll go down to 3, you'll pair another 2, you go down to 1, and there's nothing else for that apple to pair with, right? So we need to make sure that we are assigning all of these cards to have an even number of all the symbols. So what we need to do is we need to go to control, the orange category on the left. We need to drag out repeat 10. I need to put that underneath define create list. So if we're making two symbols at a time, then we need to make sure that we are making half as many symbols as we are making as we have cards. So if we have 28 cards and we're going to make 14 pairs of symbols, we need to make sure that we're only making 14 pairs of symbols, right? So we could just type in 14 here, but that would mean that if you want to make a different number of cards, then your code wouldn't work. So you could just type in 14 here if you wanted, but let's be clever about this, and then that way we could make the game get bigger with more cards in later if we wanted. So all we need to do is take the number of cards we have and divide it by 2, and that's how many pairs we need to make. All right, so we need to go to operators and look fourth from the top in our green operators codes, and you'll notice there's one with a slash. Looks like this. There's a space, a slash, and then a space. This is the symbol for divide when you're dealing with computer programming. So divide by. So drop that over the 10 in repeat 10. Put in the second space 2, because we're going to divide by 2. And we already have ourselves a handy variable that knows exactly how many cards we have, right? So let's go to variables. Let's drag out card counter from the top left corner. And whoops, we need to make sure that card counter goes in the first little hole of our divide by operator. So now we've got repeat card counter divided by 2. So if we have 28 cards, then it's going to divide that by 2 and make 14 pairs. Perfect. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to get we need to create a new variable. We're going to click on the top left corner, make a variable. So the front of the cards, there's a few different things you could call this. You could call this the card face, or you could call it the card symbol. If you like playing card games, you might call them suits. You know, like hearts and clubs and spades and diamonds are all the different suits of the cards. So that's what I'm going to call them. But as long as you understand that this is going to be talking about what is behind the card. Is it an apple? Is it a watermelon? Is it bananas? Hopefully that makes sense. So we're going to call this card suits. You can call it card face if you want, or card symbol, as long as you know what it means, and as long as you understand that when I say card suits, this is the variable I'm talking about. Okay, so we need to have numbers that represent what our costumes are of our different cards, right? So we're going to get out set variable. We're going to pull out set, and we're going to click this white triangle, set card suits to, and at this point, let's have a look at our costumes. So top left corner, where it says code, then costumes, click on costumes. Let's have a look. How many do we have? We have the apple, the bananas, the orange, the watermelon. The first costume is blank. And then we've got 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what we're going to do, everyone go back to the code. We are going to set this variable card suits, or card suit would even be better, I think. I'm going to rename this card suit. Take out that second S. Set card suit to, and then we're going to go to the green category, operators. We're going to pull out a pick random, put it over that 0 in our set card suit. Now, we don't want it to be number 1 because number 1 is blank. So we're going to say pick random 2, and I'm going to say 2 to 5 because 5 is the last costume that I have. But you might have more. If you've got more, this second number here just needs to be how many costumes you have for your cards. So set card suit to pick random 2 to 5. And then remember, we're making these in pairs, we're making these in twos. So go to control, pull out a repeat, and put it right underneath our set. Click on the 10. We only want to do this twice. Repeat 2. And what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to fill this list with a bunch of numbers that are like between 2 and 5. And then the order of the list will affect the order of the cards. So we want it to be random. We can't just put them all in order. Otherwise, all the cards will always be next to each other in the list. So we want this to be random. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to variables, the dark orange category on the left. We're going to look down for all of our list codes and look for insert thing at 1 of card list. Drag out insert thing at 1 of card list. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go up to card suit, drag out this card, so the card suit variable, the nice rounded one, drag it and put it over the word thing. So remember, this card suit variable, we could make this variable a word like apple or banana or watermelon, but we'd have to do some more code for that because of the random number generation we're doing. So just remember, when card suit is set to 2, what it really means is apple. When it's set to 4, what it really means is orange. That's all these numbers mean. So we're going to insert card suit, and so then what we want this to do, this piece of code, insert card suit, it needs to go into a random point in the list. Now, our list is empty, and it's going to start off at 0, and it's going to get longer as items get added into the list. And we're going to be putting these items in at random points in the list, inserting it high or low in the list. So what we need to do is we need to put this into a random point. So we're going to go to operators. We're going to get out pick random 1 to 10 and put it over the 1. So now we've got insert card suit at pick random 1 to 10 of card list. Now we don't know how long the list is going to be as it's inserting all of these random card suit numbers. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to variables, and we're going to get out we're going to look for something called length of card list. It's near the end of all the list codes. Pull out length of card list. So this is going to be the number of however, and then you need to put that over the 10 in our pick random 1 to 10. So what this is going to do is it's going to choose a random point in the list, and it's going to put the card in at that number. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to test it. So hit go, and now what you can see is we've got this long list. There are 28 different numbers in this list, which is perfect because we've got 28 cards. So we've got all these numbers here. Remember, these numbers represent the different fruit or whatever the suits of your cards are. Now, we have a bit of a problem, because if we keep clicking go, it keeps adding more and more and more and more into the list. So what we need to do is go looking for when green flag clicked, and we need to put right underneath when green flag clicked, delete all of card list so that it empties out the list. Okay. So now Now we have a slightly different problem. Every time you hit go, we don't always get 28 in the list. Have a look at the list length right here. It says 23 this time. So each time I hit go to start a new game, sometimes it's 28. We want there to be 28 items on the list. Sometimes they are not 28, and this is a problem. So the thing that I think it might, I think I know what might be going wrong. But we need to find a way to fix it. So for those who are interested, I think the problem is to do with when the list is empty, and there's a pick random 1 to 0. I think that might be the problem. But we're going to do a little hack here, meaning we're going to create a fix that ensures we're going to create additional code to fix a problem with an inconsistency in our code. And here's how it's going to work. We're going to make our define create list code run a couple of times until we know we have exactly the number of we have the correct number of items in our list. So we need to go to control and we need to look for repeat until. Drag out repeat until and put that underneath define create list so that it wraps around all of our code. So we need to repeat this process until we have 28 items in our card list. So we're going to go to operators and we're going to look for an equals operator. Look down until you see about 8 from the top. There's a space and then an equals and then a 50. Drag that and put that next to repeat until. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to variables. We're going to look down and find length of card list. Drag that out and put it in the first space. Repeat until length of card list equals. Now we could just type in 28 if we wanted. And that would work if you have exactly 28 cards and only ever have exactly 28 cards. But the other option is we're going to grab out card counter and put that in there. Because our card counter knows how many cards we have, we need to make sure that our length of card list is the same. But now that we're repeating this over and over and over again, we need to make sure before we repeat it, we need to make sure that we empty the list first. Otherwise, we're going to end up with 50-something cards. So get out, delete all of card list and put that right underneath our line where it says repeat until. And right above, repeat card counter divided by 2. So there it goes. It needs to go right here. And now, this time, let's test it. Every single time, the length is 28. So you've probably heard of the term hacking in terms of breaking into someone's computer or stealing something. But hacking can also just mean creating a piece of code that fixes a problem with another piece of code. It's kind of an interesting thing to do. You might have heard the term life hack, meaning something, a cool trick that's going to fix a problem in your life. And so that's the kind of hack we just made. Ideally, you want your code not to need hacks, but sometimes it's the easiest way to make your code work. There are other ways of solving this problem. And if you've got a good solution for one, leave me a comment in the YouTube comments. I'd love to hear some other possible solutions. Maybe you've got a way better solution than mine. You might have a better idea of what caused the original problem in the first place, with the length of the list not being always 28. So we've got pretty much everything done that we need to do. The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to look for when this sprite clicked. Look for that code there. I'm going to make that nice and big so you can see it. And now it all comes together. So take out this pick random 2 to 5 so that we've just got switch costume to something. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to variables, look down for the dark orange list codes and pull out item 1 of card list, drop that in. So it's going to say switch costume to item 1 of card list. And this is where the card ID comes in. So look up for your rounded card ID variable and drop that in item 1. So each card, remember, it knows it's got a card ID number, and that card ID number is where it sits in the list. There are 28 cards and there are 28 entries on the list. So each time now we click on a card, it's going to know which of the fruit it's meant to be. And we can see this. So for example, this card here should be card ID number 7. And if we look at card ID number 7, the card suit is card suit number 3. And card suit number 3 should be bananas. So as a test, let's click on this card here and it should be bananas. And it's bananas. So it's working. We've got all of these different cards. They all know which cards they're meant to be. We've got our card count, we've got our variables and our list keeping track of everything so that our game works correctly. All we need to do now, next week, is make the code that matches them together and sees if we got the answers right. So, the thing I'd recommend you do now is go to variables and untick some of these variables and codes so that your game is nice and visible, doesn't have everything in the way. And yeah, that's it for this week. I hope that was interesting. I hope you learned a little bit about lists and variables and have a good idea of how to use them in your game, your own games when you make them in the future. As always, subscribe to see the next episode, ring the bell and that kind of thing. And stay awesome, be cool to each other and take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time, ninjas.